I've been working as a temp for 3 years and was supposed to leave the company without a contract renewal. On my first day of unemployment, I found myself being begged by the beautiful company CEO right in front of her house. My name is Ethan Bridge, and I'm 38 years old. I work as a temp at a trading company with about 20 employees. Originally, I was a full-time employee, but 5 years ago, I resigned to take care of my mother. Growing up in a single-parent household, I consider myself fortunate to have spent her final years together. After saying goodbye to my mother, I found myself alone at 35, trying to re-enter the workforce. Without notable skills and with a several-year gap, I ended up as a temp at my current company. The company was built from scratch by the former CEO, Nelson, who passed away suddenly a year before I joined. His eldest daughter, Natalie Nelson, took over, though she was still in her 20s at the time. Under her leadership, the company's performance steadily improved. With business expansion came the need for more staff, leading to the hiring of temps like me. Natalie is known in the industry for her beautiful appearance and sharp business acumen. However, internal evaluations of her are quite harsh. The office is on the same floor for all positions, so all employees work with a constant sense of tension. As a temp with no skills, I naturally couldn't be trusted with any responsible tasks. My days were spent handling menial tasks. On my first day of unemployment, I was handed a few mugs and headed to the washing area. I'm about to reach the end of my 3-year contract, and the only skills I've acquired are efficient cleaning and knowing the coffee preferences of all employees, including Natalie. The only praise I received was for cleaning a coffee stain off a mug that had been used by the employees for years. "Did you do this?" Natalie had once asked, having never spoken to me before. "Yes, I used a dish bleach for the cup stains," I answered nervously. She looked straight into my eyes. "Excuse me, but I'll get back to work," I said, feeling nervous but not ashamed, as she was truly admirable. 3 years of menial tasks flew by quickly, and the day my contract ended arrived. There was no renewal or department change, and the simple procedures continued under the assumption that I was to leave. My supervisors, though not bad people, didn't seem to care much about my departure. I kept telling myself it was better to move on without any lingering attachments. At the very last moment, I was called by Natalie. Though it was just a simple farewell, I was happy she even bothered to speak to me. "Natalie, I think you shouldn't overdo it," I added. To my surprise, she looked shocked. "Oh, did I seem that way?" she asked. Though she never showed any signs of weakness or fatigue, I could tell from her mug stains. "I mean the stains on your mug were the toughest to clean," I said. She looked at me, even more surprised. Afraid of being scolded, I quickly said, "Oh, sorry, please never mind that. Thank you very much. Excuse me," and was about to leave the room. "Wait a minute," she suddenly stopped me, grabbed my arm, and clearly said, "Can I ask you for a department transfer?" A few days after quitting the temp agency, I found myself riding the bus, dressed almost like I was lounging at home. I got off at a bus stop a bit away from the business district and looked around the square outside. "Ethan." I turned towards the voice that echoed clearly in the quiet square and saw Natalie waving at me in front of a car. That day was a company holiday. Natalie, not in her usual suit but in casual clothes, showed a sense of everyday life that I had never felt from her before. "I'm really sorry for making such an unexpected request. I'm really grateful you accepted," Natalie said as she drove through a quiet residential neighborhood and parked the car in front of a particular house. She naturally was about to get off and head inside when I called out to her again to make sure. "Sorry, but are you sure I'm the right person for this?" She calmed down and repeated what she had said before. "Definitely. You'll live here, won't you?" "With my sister, just until I return from the business trip." Surprisingly, my new job was at Natalie's house. She would be away in a state for a month and a half starting next week, leaving the house empty during that time. My job was to take care of the household and look after her sister, who was 4 years younger than her. "Could you please help?" "Of course, I'll pay you whatever it takes, and you can use the house as you like," Natalie asked. Without much hesitation, I agreed. Looking back, I'm not sure if it was the money or the house that drew me in, but I was just happy to be relied upon by Natalie. We walked through a garden overgrown with weeds, and Natalie finally opened the front door. The house was impressive, though not the mansion I had imagined. However, the inside of the house wasn't clean, and there were items that hadn't been moved since her parents had passed away. I had a sense of why I was called here, but probably the main reason was "This is my sister Ruby. Hey Ruby, this is the person I told you about. Say hello," Natalie said. Surprised by Natalie's gentle voice for the first time, my gaze followed to a familiar bed, the care bed that I had bought when my mother could no longer move on her own. On it lay a young woman who looked too young for such a bed, glaring weakly at me. "Hi, I'm Ethan. I'm here to help with anything," I said. Overwhelmed by Ruby's wariness, I quickly added, "Of course, I'll be heading back home." "Oh, you can stay here if you like," said Natalie, although I frantically shook my head. Eventually, without hearing Ruby's voice, I left the room, and Natalie showed me around the house. My duties were mainly cleaning, sorting through belongings, gardening, and preparing Ruby's meals. She had been receiving meal deliveries but was apparently tired of the taste. Even as I listened to the explanation, I kept thinking about her. Given my mother's situation and my experience in caregiving, Ruby's situation felt entirely different. Ruby was involved in an accident when she was young. I was nearby at the time, but only she was affected. She probably hates me. That's why I always thought someone else should take care of her, Natalie confided. The more I heard, the more anxious I became, but moved by Natalie's voice, I felt a firm sense of responsibility. Well, she can do most basic things on her own with a wheelchair, but she can be quite demanding. Just call me if anything comes up, and please never enter my room on the second floor, Natalie instructed, handing me the spare keys as she saw me out. I'm coming to this house starting tomorrow, I thought. I still couldn't quite grasp the reality, but having accepted the job, I knew I couldn't go into it half-heartedly. The next day, I quickly finished cleaning the garden and approached Ruby, who was sitting on her bed reading a book. "Is there anything I should do?" I asked. "No," she replied coldly without looking up. It was the first time I heard her voice. She seemed able to manage basic living on her own and could even make her own coffee while reading. Since there was still a week left on her meal delivery service contract, there was no need for me to cook. She had completely shut herself off, and forcibly opening up wouldn't make any sense. Resigned to that, I spent my time cleaning the house. Although not asked, I had been sending brief update emails to Natalie, who was in another state. Her replies were just okay, the same as when she was busy at work. That continued as I hardly saw Ruby's face, just cleaning the house day after day. One day, while I was tidying the kitchen and watching Ruby's back as she read in bed, she unexpectedly muttered, "Oh, she probably ran out of coffee." Maybe out of habit, I quickly approached and asked, "Shall I make some coffee for you?" Without taking her eyes off her book, she muttered, "Just make it." At that moment, I was struck by her dismissive tone and her profile. It was natural since they were sisters, but she resembled Natalie so much, just like how Natalie would hand over a mug without looking away from her computer and say, "Just make it." I prepared the instant coffee available in the kitchen and placed it beside Ruby, saying, "Here you go." Without looking away from her book, she took a sip and glanced at me for the first time. Looking into her eyes and seeing her skin up close, she seemed much younger than Natalie and even more radiant under the daylight. It was just a few seconds of eye contact, and without saying anything, she returned to her reading. From that day on, she began to ask me to make her coffee. Furthermore, the interactions weren't limited to just brief ones to refill her coffee. With the end of the meal delivery service contract, I started cooking for her. At first, everything was a guessing game, and it was difficult to discern her preferences since she never showed her emotions. However, after about 2 weeks, I started finding notes like roast chicken, or meatloaf, or pasta or stew, with no broccoli secretly left on the table. They were probably written by Ruby during cleaning. I realized she did have her whims, as Natalie had mentioned, but I also started to feel a sense of affection. When I messaged that to Natalie, she replied with an unusual exclamation. "Okay." I fist pumped alone, feeling victorious. Just as I began to think Ruby was opening up to me, she asked me for something quite difficult. "Take me to Natalie's room," she said, looking directly into my eyes from her bed. I couldn't break my promise to Natalie to never enter that room, and Ruby's earlier words, "I think she hates me," weighed on my mind. Given how different their personalities and situations were, it was impossible to predict what they thought of each other. Natalie's room was upstairs, and Ruby couldn't get there on her own. Even if it was her sister's request, I couldn't break my promise to Natalie. "I can't take you to the room." I dodged the issue, but from then on, Ruby would pout daily saying, "I want to go to the room." When I refused, she would glare at me and mutter, "Coward." But I stood firm. One evening, when I returned from shopping and opened the front door, the first thing I saw was Ruby crouching at the bottom of the stairs. "Are you okay?" I dropped the groceries and rushed over. She seemed unhurt, but her cheeks were flushed. Clearly, she had tried to go to Natalie's room on her own. "Why do you want to go upstairs so badly?" I asked. "There's something I need to check," she said, looking away. Carrying her up the stairs step by step, she was lighter than I had imagined. "This is our little secret from Natalie, okay?" I said to her. I felt something earnest in her voice earlier, not just whimsy. "You want to see the room more than I do, don't you?" She whispered so close to my ear. We reached the door, and I apologized to Natalie in my heart as I opened it. But it was just an ordinary room, though fitting for a company CEO. Textbooks and economics books from her student days were piled high, evidence of her intelligence and hard work away from the public eye. Caught up in my thoughts, I suddenly looked at Ruby, who was staring at one spot on the desk. Following her gaze, I saw 3 framed photos. The faded photos were likely of the family, young siblings running around hand in hand, washed by their parents, and scenes from Natalie's birthdays. All of them featured the sisters smiling. Looking at the photos, I instantly understood how Natalie felt about her sister, and Ruby felt the same. Her smile as she looked at the photos warmed my heart too. "Would you like to take one down with you?" I asked. She replied, "No, I'd get scolded. Natalie has always been strict, you know. Wasn't she tough at the company as well?" "Yeah, pretty much," I replied with an innocent laugh. I didn't mention that incident in my nightly email to Natalie, but I wrote, "Ruby is a wonderful person, much like you," to which she simply responded, "I know." In the last week, Ruby started to share various things with me. She even suggested, "Let's go shopping together," and showed an interest in the outside world. Of course, Ruby's whims were still there as she kept adjusting my speed while I pushed her wheelchair. Too slow. Now too fast. After a month and a half, Natalie returned. We were a bit late heading to the airport, where Natalie was scanning the crowd with her heavy luggage. "Natalie." As she turned at my call, she quickly looked down and exclaimed, "Ruby," dropping her bags and rushing over. "I'm sorry we're late. Ruby insisted on coming to meet you," I explained. "Hey, Ethan, it's not my fault, okay?" Ruby complained from her wheelchair, perhaps embarrassed to meet Natalie's gaze. Natalie, likely seeing Ruby smile for the first time in years, looked like she was about to cry. "Shall we head home?" I suggested, boldly escorting the 2 of them home. Seeing the sisters' smiles was all I could have wished for. I thought that was truly the end. The house was spotless, and Natalie was thrilled with my cooking. Who would have thought we'd be having a meal together like this? She almost cried again before taking a deep breath and then said, "Ethan, I want to thank you." As I started to protest, she cut me off. "I want you to marry Ruby. You're the only one for her. You're the only one she's opened up to this much." She blurted it all out in one go. Naturally, I was at a loss for words. Marriage? That thought was fleeting. An ephemeral hope bubbled up within me only to vanish in an instant. "What are you talking about, Natalie?" "Absolutely not." Ruby's response came without any hesitation. While Natalie was surprised, I expected her to react that way. However, her words weren't done yet. "It's you who should be getting married, Ethan. You like Natalie, right?" Those words left both Natalie and me wide-eyed, unable to stop our faces from flushing. Seeing that, Ruby laughed heartily. "Ethan, you're too obvious. You always look so happy when I talk about Natalie, and I like your coffee, but I prefer a more handsome guy." There was no escaping at that point. Cliché as it sounds, from the moment I first met Natalie, I noticed I liked her. Additionally, those past 6 weeks I've spent with Ruby have indeed drawn me closer to Natalie. I cherished the affection I felt for Ruby and wanted to share that feeling with Natalie. Above all, those days have shown me how tenderly Natalie thinks of Ruby. "Natalie, the mug you've always used at the office. That was a gift from Ruby, wasn't it?" The photos in that room I secretly entered from her childhood birthday party showed Ruby giving that mug to Natalie. "You saw them?" Natalie glanced at us sternly for a moment, then relaxed and said with a smile, "You're right. That's why I was so happy when you cleaned the mug. It's hard to put into words, but I knew then that you could be a support for us." It looks like I wasn't wrong. Her smile moved me deeply, something I had longed to see. Ruby shared her thoughts. "I always thought I was holding my brilliant sister back. That's why I was always so cold. I'm sorry, but I want you to be happier from now on. That's why I recommend this guy. She playfully nudged me, her voice trembling. Natalie, would you like to keep living together? The three of us? At my words, Natalie said, trying to act tough. Well, let's renew the contract then. Despite their different paths, the sisters, who always cared for each other, were indeed alike in some ways. Years later, I am still living in that house, now practically a stay-at-home husband with my wife, Natalie, and Ruby. Both the company's performance and my cooking skills are on the rise. Even though it's a holiday today, the sisters are just lounging around at home. More coffee, please. Ruby is still demanding but has become noticeably cheerier. She is even starting to get attention from clients at her new job, playfully boasting about potentially marrying into wealth. Honey, I want some too. Just make it however you like, called Natalie's gentle voice. I went to get matching mugs for the three of us.